My name's Toni King. I'm a consultant occupational therapist. I work in mental health services in Solent NHS Trust, which is on the south of England. And just along the way, I'm at University of Brighton as well in my 4th year of a part-time PhD. And you're going to hear a bit about the PhD from Dan. So I won't talk about that bit, but we use that to kind of hang the exploration of co-production from it. So we're going to use that as a case study, and you'll hear more about that. And I think for all three of us, so Claire, Dan and myself, you'll hear from all of us. But one of the things we're really interested in is what you think about this topic. So when we finish speaking in about half an hour, it'd be really great to hear your thoughts and suggestions and challenges or reflections. Now, currently, I've got 2 pre-registration OT students with me, and when I talked to them about this presentation, their piece of advice to me was, Toni, make sure that people know what co-production means before you begin. So taking the advice from them, I just wanted to check, do you want to maybe put in the chat, maybe rate yourself out of 5? 5 being, I'd be absolutely ready to deliver co-production tomorrow. Some of you, that will be an unfamiliar term, that's okay, you're going to be down on the 1s. If it's a familiar term, you might be up towards the 4s and 5s, and it may be that we can get some change on that during this presentation. Lovely, thank you, that's really helpful already. Some 2s, some 4s, and I imagine we will get a range. If you've never heard of it before, and that might be, you know, it might not be culturally, it might not move into other cultures, that's all fine, just give us the 1s and 0s, that'd be great. That's looking good, and Dan might be able to add these up for me, he's very technical like this. Okay, so what I'll do then is I'll give you a little bit of a background of co-production before we go further, just so that you've got that history. Now, it's one of those terms that's quite elastic, and it's critiqued for that because it can be applied in very many different ways. But it's been around since around the 1960s. It was used a lot in public administration. People like Eleanor Ostrom first started writing about it. And it's a version of involvement, but it's kind of involvement plus, for want of a better word. So in this way of working, people who are traditionally a recipient of a service become part of designing, exploring the problem, delivering, evaluating the solution. So it's not consulting where you go to somebody with an idea, but rather they're part of that whole journey with you. And there are many, many examples. So it's written about an awful lot in kind of geography journals where they're looking at involving villages in thinking about sourcing water, because local knowledge knows where the water is and technical knowledge knows how to get it out of the ground. They use it in high-rise flats to try and solve graffiti problems. They used it, it first came out of New York policing when they removed police from the streets and then realised that actually they couldn't manage crime without the public involvement and that relationship needing to be in there. So the breadth of co-production is very broad, but in the UK, it's absolutely centred now in policy, in guidance for health and social care, and in research. And although the expectation is there, the reality is a little way away from that at the moment. But in research, which is what we'll focus on here, it's about the studied being part of the studiers, thinking about how to study, how to involve people and ensure that they're part of that. So co-production is as much kind of underpinned by the values that it's done with as it is by the output. And we'll give you an example through the PhD of what that might look like. It's just one example, and it's not to kind of hold it up, but just to give you a framework for that. But I'll hand over to Claire next, and then I'll pick up with you later.
Hello, I'm Claire, and my apologies again for arriving at the 11th hour. As well as being a service user, I am a carer, but I always identify primarily as a service user, and I've been involved with mental health co-production over probably more years than I care to remember. You can guess from the grey hairs, but so this is just an outline of what we're hoping to do. And Dan's going to talk about how we've made this production as doing a PhD as a case study of how we've worked with co-production within what is normally regarded as quite a solitary occupation. We can't write the thesis for Toni. We can help with other bits, but we can't write her thesis. So we're going on, as you are, I believe, all occupational therapists, we're going on to think about how co-production is as an occupation. And we're going to be reflecting on the occupational cycle of being, doing, belonging and becoming. And we'll put that in the context of Toni's experience overall, and I'll be looking at how we've all three done it within a team over one specific piece of work that we did quite early on. And then we'll hopefully draw it all together. We are, as Toni said, really interested in what your thoughts are, your questions, what experience and guidance you've got, because we don't claim we know it all. We've got little bits of expertise, but we're not gurus. So do feel free at the end to chip in with your own experiences and wisdom as well as questions. And now I think I'm handing over to Dan, who's going to give us a bit of the background context.
Hi, I'm Dan. I have experience of mental health difficulties and have worked in patient and public involvement on a casual basis for Sussex Partnership NHS Foundation Trust for a number of years. I'm just going to give an overview of the research process in Toni King's Spices study and put things in context. Spices looks at the experience of power in conversations after self-harm from people who have either accessed or worked in community mental health teams in Sussex Partnership in the last 6 months. This presentation is focusing on co-production, however, and the details of self-harm will not be discussed. 4 service users and 3 staff self-selected to participate from posters advertising the research. They created and brought images which illustrated their experience of power, which were discussed in conversation within the individual interviews, and then 2 mixed focus groups with both service users and staff are conducted. All these sessions were run using video conferencing calls. At the moment, we're at the stage of analysing the results. I first met Toni when she led a targeted consultation at a lived experience advisory forum meeting at my local trust in Sussex, where she introduced the research for her project to the group. I remember her approach being quite novel, and we were asked to draw pictures and write things down related to power issues in self-harm. I attended 2 of 3 of these LEAF meetings, but Toni also gave 2 mixed audience conferences and 2 mixed audience email consultations as well. Co-production started about 1 year later when Claire and I were recruited to our roles as lived experience research advisors, or LERAs, after being selected from 5 applicants for the job. We have role descriptions, clarity about responsibilities between the NHS and Toni, and which aspects of research we are involved in. At our first online video call, Claire, Toni and I established a Let's Be way of working using the 4 Pi: principles, purpose, presence, process and impact, and GRIP 2 frameworks. By the time we were creating the participant-focused recruitment materials, we had got to know each other. After some time trying to refine the examples Toni created, we agreed that Claire and I would lead on co-producing documents like the patient information sheets and consent forms, as between us we had more experience than Toni in this area, coming from a wide range of research projects. We also developed leaflets and a recruitment poster. Previously, we had been used to just giving feedback on material produced by health professionals and other similar types of people, but this was different. We will talk about this later. In gaining approval from the research ethics committees, we were advised to amend aspects of our work. We welcomed and found common ground between us on recommendations, for example adding an additional consent stage and seeking further advice on wanting to retain the opportunity for staff and service users to attend together in the same focus groups. Another example was where as a team we had to go with ethics advice, namely creating separate participant information sheets for the two groups in the study, service users and staff. This was the first situation where having multiple perspectives was valuable to the research and to us in becoming a team. Over time, some tasks have naturally been led by the person with strengths in that area. Toni successfully applied for 2 awards to pay for my and Clare's co-production work. Clare managed the budget, whereas I created a website, updating it at various intervals to advertise the study, provide a hub for the recruitment materials we had developed, and to reflect our progress. Both Clare and I had local connections and knowledge to help encourage recruitment. Other areas have been more shared, such as when we began to look at critical discourse analysis training for ourselves. At the start of 2022, we began planning for a presentation at the International Resilience Revolution Conference for that coming March. The title of the presentation was Co-Production with a PhD, Study of Power in Conversations After Self-Harm, Help or Hindrance, where we discussed whether co-production was benefiting the research process. We also felt it was important to continue to inform the people who had first input into creation of the research question. In October of the same year, Clare and I attended a local NHS-led workshop called Approaches to Involvement and Recovery, led by Dr. Sam Robertson, a subgroup of LEAF with about the same original mix of attendees as before. We shared how the study was progressing, took feedback and wrote in reply, confirming which aspects were adjusted in response to their suggestions. In April 2023, Toni began conducting the individual interviews for the study. We all began working on analysing them, and the findings informed the focus groups, which we did together in early 2024, where we looked at certain topics in more detail. While Toni, Clare and I met mostly online, we did get together in person on a couple of occasions and set up regular reviews every 4 to 6 weeks. Throughout, Toni also attended sessions with her supervisors to gain expert support and advice and refer any issues we were unable to resolve. To conclude this overview, in terms of co-producing the Spices study with Toni and Clare, the process has been a stretch at times, but very rewarding. I have described what we have done so far, and now Toni will consider how this has affected us using a framework familiar to you.
So that's Dan summarising 4 years' work in 6 minutes, which I think is pretty good. And he's here to answer questions later on if you've got questions for him. So I'm just going to shift us now to think about why I'm thinking about co-production. And really, you know, in any setting, co-production will ensure that you're bringing multiple perspectives to something. And for me, I'm doing critical realist approach in my PhD. So the assumption would be that there are lots of domains and influences that are perhaps less visible, that you can't get hold of, they're not tangible. So for example, the Mental Health Act influences the conversation, even if it's not being directly discussed. And so trying to understand that is quite a challenge, and having multiple perspectives means that I'm less likely to go down a cul-de-sac or to make assumptions about something. And we also know from the research around co-production that you're more likely to come up with a research question that is acceptable for the people that you're studying, that the dissemination is more likely to be powerful, and that the participants are more likely to engage in a slightly different format. So for me, I would argue that co-production is essential in a critical realist study, and it's quite understandable that I would want to show off about it. And it's also clear that there's not very much published on co-production, particularly within a PhD. So Coupe's work talks about the fact that although people want it, There's not a lot of advice and guidance. But actually, this is more than that. This is also because when I reflect on my PhD journey and use my diaries and my discussions with my supervisor notes and with Dan and Claire, we've got a reflexive diary that we keep. Co-production keeps coming up. It's got really high frequency. It's got a really high emotional tone to it for me. It's really, really important. And it's the thing that I talk about most when I'm describing what I'm doing. And that to me as an occupational therapist tells me that this has got meaning and purpose. Aha. So here's the gap for me. In my PhD, I don't really feel very OT. So in my professional job, I'm an OT, and in my research job, it seems like there's a gap. So I'm taking advantage of having this opportunity to bring the two together and make my little soul happy by integrating those two parts of myself. And we'll use the PhD as a framework to do that. So co-production then is using a whole set of skills that I use in different settings over a temporal, it's a temporal nature. So over time, I use them in very different spaces. And it's almost so diverse that I hadn't stopped to think about it as an occupation. And it's only through having a think about it through the occupational science theory of the occupational perspective of health, which Anne Wilcock has brought us since '98 through to about 2007 and evolved from there. But starting to specifically use that lens has been really, really interesting for me. But I started out with the question, will it bring any new knowledge, thinking about this as an occupation? So here I am applying an occupational science theory as an occupational therapist to my own occupation to see if it influences my sense of my health and how that's been affected. So you'll probably be familiar that there are 4 dimensions within this model. Sometimes it's called DB3, doing, being, becoming, and belonging came along slightly later. And that you can use those dimensions to help us articulate the function of occupations in all their wonderful variety. And no wonder we have a complex job trying to explain what that is when you think about all the different places and people and settings that we work in. And there's been a lot of subsequent work by Bex Twinley. Oh gosh, what's her name? Someone Hamill. It's a double-barreled name. I've got it in there.
Aaron Wally Hamill.
Thank you. Thank you. I can't see my notes. Bex knows that I had notes written that I can't view at the moment, so I'm doing it by rote. And by Danielle Hitch and Iwana. So there's a few other authors, but we know from that these 4 dimensions are necessary, that we need to include the focus on belonging and connecting, that's significant in this space. It wasn't in the original model. That doing in isolation doesn't capture the complexity of our work. We know that the 4 dimensions interact and that they're non-linear. It could be in any order. And in fact, Iwana's work talks about how different cultures might start in different places and have different priorities, which I think probably rings true for all of us. And that all of them together are health influencing, whether that's beneficial or not, depending whether you're involved in dark occupations, other occupations, whatever you're examining. But for me, in considering this as part of my PhD, it made sense to think about where's my dis-ease, where was I where was my discomfort in my PhD journey? And I mean, I could go down the practical route of saying, well, I don't have enough time. I work full time and then I do my PhD. So there's tension around time, there's tension around money, there's tension around learning new things. But this was deeper than that. And so my understanding by using this model, so the colours match, I don't know if you can see it very clearly, but it's got the being, doing, becoming, belonging up in the right hand corner, and then the quotes come from my reflexive diaries on the central piece there. So if I start to think about where my dis-ease was, it's definitely in my occupational sense of my being. There's an occupational disruption in who I was. My essence of self was really quite skewed, and that would make sense in terms of Marit Borg's work, where she talks about the divide between researchers are really interested in knowing how, clinicians are really interested in knowing what. And so that can divide sometimes. There's also the transition between novice and expert. I'm a consultant in my day job, and here I am a beginner again in the research world, or advanced beginner. So this transition then is quite uncomfortable. And I think that disruption in my being is partly what was going on for me in those first 2 or 3 years. And even when I was trying, and I try all my normal study skills, I still didn't know if I was doing it right. When I have a look at my diaries, what I can see is that through grappling with the theory, ontology, epistemology, all these words I'd never even heard of, I could see something that was familiar. If I use co-production, which I do all day long, in a methodology, in my research, I'm familiar with that, and I can start to engage people with lived experience in finding solutions to the very knottiest of problems, and that I can bring that here. So that's in my doing. I can bring co-production, and recognizing that in the academic space there's actually quite limited guidance and publication around PhDs. So then moving into the becoming, and I feel like this is where there's the stretch space in the becoming. This is where I could see, okay, I have got some answers. I can start to debate with my supervisors on a more equal level rather than feeling like I haven't got enough knowledge. I could question things and explore things. I could lead on certain decisions. I could really start to make recommendations and build this academic knowledge of co-production and stretch what I'd already brought into the space. And then, of course, because I then employed Dan and Clare, I was not on my own. So I've got this belonging space. I can start to do that as part of a team. And then if I take that to the next level, so I won't go on forever on this, but it's a little bit like a spiral. As soon as I've got my belonging, I start to feel safe in myself. And if I can feel safe in my essence, then I can start to develop and learn. And that's when I could start to think about what I do bring, that I do have value, that I am my whole self in this space. The doing became more about presenting, discussing, as you're supposed to do as a PhD student, but it was quite difficult all through COVID to even, keep those connections. So there were particular challenges. But in doing that, presenting and discussing, then I could start to see that actually other students valued this information and would want to know more. So then in the becoming, I can see that I'm now starting to integrate all of my pillars as a consultant: research, leadership, education, clinical work. I can engage clinicians that work around co-production, students that I work with, presented at the Royal College of OT conference on this. I can engage other researchers and practitioners, my profession, in becoming co-producers, which then has implications for population health and helps us with our whole kind of belonging in that bigger population and our space as a profession. So able to contribute to both the academic and the clinical world. So for me, really putting a spotlight on this co-production piece really rings true for me. And although the PhD has been a huge challenge at times, poor David and team that have been supporting me through it, the co-production piece has been the bit that's really pulled me through. So it's boosted my motivation, it's helped with my being, my belief in myself, and the occupational lens has really helped me to think about that differently. So I was convinced that it brought something new, and I gave it to Clare and Dan to have a think about whether it contributed anything to their experience. Clare, I think we've got around 6 minutes, so you've got a slide, I've got a slide, and then we'll be concluding. But Clare's going to give us a more specific focus. Thanks.
Yeah, this slide is very small print, so we have broken it down into 3 separate lines. But we thought it would be really useful to look at how we all approached and experienced the developing our participant information. So all the information sheets, consent forms, that kind of thing. And Dan started with this feeling of underachievement, which is very harsh on himself, because Dan has done an amazing lot of work, because he managed to get his degree and gone on and done a master's since being ill. Yes, the illness has disrupted it, but he's always kept on doing alongside the being. And supporting research has been one of his great fortes. Working on the documents, I think we all found very rewarding, though, as Dan said earlier, we weren't used to having to take the lead on it, and that felt uncomfortable, but it did draw out a lot of the skills that we brought into the project. And I think the bit that we both felt difficult is Toni had done some initial work, and we both looked at it and said, this won't do. And we felt really awkward about it. She was wonderful about it, I should say. There were no tantrums thrown or strops or anything else. She was absolutely fantastic. But for us, and Dan talks about it, the degree of honesty that we needed was quite hard. We are used to being the service user, however much we have been involved. Very often we're still the junior partners, whereas within this, we have all been pretty much equal. And being able to challenge and realizing it worked was quite a formative process, I think. And it has felt so valuable. Dan has said how pleased he felt to be giving value, and Dan has brought so much value. And he's got, as you may have noticed, Toni and I are both female. Dan, being the only male in the group, brings quite a different perspective, not just in his gender, but he's very techy, great at putting together the website. We wouldn't have managed that without him, and so many other things like that. So that progress of realizing that we had that value to bring was quite inspirational in itself, and I think we've all got stronger through it. Now, the next, can you flip back to you next, Toni? Because thank you. I flipped these round earlier. As Toni was so welcoming. She initially came to that LEAF group, as has been mentioned, and she has brought a lot of co-production experience, and that helped us when we were being critical because she'd heard it before a bit. And you'll see in that sort of belonging bit, isn't it, the blue? I can't read my notes, the bit's too small, but she felt uncomfortable, but she accepted that she didn't need to be the expert in everything, and could accept that what we were saying may be more authentic in terms of how people might respond. So that recognition of what we could do to help. And I don't think either of us often feel very expertise. I certainly resist being called an expert by experience, but she was more than ready to use what we could do. And as we've gone on, we have found it works really well as a model for doing the PhD work. There are bits that we have to leave to Toni, but equally we can share the load in a lot of places. And Toni has shown that so brilliantly. And if we go on to the last one, my one, sorry, that's it. I didn't feel I brought a lot, but my real perspective is about the lived experience that I've got. And I'd done research before in various contexts, locally and nationally. Oh, had that sort of different perspective, and I loved doing some of the writing stuff because I like playing with words and with language, so that was right up my street. And we grew together. I became a lot less scared and grew in confidence that I could help meaningfully on that, because I was quite happy to take a back seat and just contribute little bits. And I think the safety of the group is amazing, and not just in the context of this, but a lot more widely. My life can be a bit of a car crash, and I've always felt so supported by Toni and by Dan, and I'm so grateful for that. Okay.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you. So we've got one more slide. So just in conclusion then, the question that I would set myself at the beginning is there any value in thinking about co-production as an occupation? And if the measure is whether this brings new knowledge, either to co-production or to occupation, then I felt that that was a valuable thing to do and to bring here. Hopefully you'll agree. And there are three things that I think are key to bring out. So in my example, where being is disrupted, the intentional exploration of the other dimensions has been beneficial. And that's something that we can transfer as occupational therapists into other areas. And in particular, if we can identify a transferable occupation, that will then facilitate that change process, that health giving aspect. So Ennals talks about this happening a lot for clinicians moving into the academic space. I'm not the only person, so I know that it's got wider use, and that as educators, as clinicians, as academics or researchers in this space, that you could enable others by thinking about this for people that are struggling with their identity in whatever space that's in. Secondly, in terms of co-production being health enhancing, I think that this is quite interesting because one of the critiques of co-production is that it's all very nice for the people that are involved, but it takes longer and it's more expensive. So why would we pay for it? And this starts to look at why it might be beneficial. Actually, what's the function of all of those different aspects that's happening in co-production that doesn't happen in other areas of involvement, PPI? And so it starts to ask the question of why there's this beneficial aspect within co-production. And I think that's new to the co-production research. And then finally, just thinking about that individual group and population level, that this has benefited me, which is great for me and great for University of Brighton to have hopefully a completed PhD at the end of it. But it's also been really great for us as a group, as you can hear, and we go on and do more as a result. And hopefully as we keep sharing this kind of knowledge, maybe publishing, that we start to create population health changes through co-production, through the awareness of occupation in different spaces, and just really championing our place in this space, really. So I'm really excited by the new sort of understanding that bringing an occupational lens has brought to me, and I'd be really interested to know more from you guys. There is a load of references and some